The charisma, skill, and decades of great performances by Sally Field have made her famous. However, even the most adored celebrities have private lives outside of the spotlight. Sally Field has finally spoken up about the 6 actors she detested working with after years of silence. Her justifications are unexpected and show an aspect of Hollywood that the general public is rarely exposed to. When most of us hear Sally Field's name, a particular mental picture pops into our heads. Steel Magnolias features the caring and resilient Malin Etunton, Gidget on her surfboard, the devoted and dedicated Flying Nun, and the tough-as-nails union activist Norma Ray Webster. We witnessed the woman who, in an overwhelming surge of pure, unadulterated ecstasy, stepped on the Oscar platform and proclaimed, "You like me. Right now you like me." She represents courage, kindness, and indisputable ability, and she is widely believed to be America's beloved. Starting off as inoffensive comedy material, she went on to win 2 Oscars for Best Actress, demonstrating over and again that she was an influential, sensitive artist. Her career is a model of progression, but there's a much more complicated, difficult, and conflicted narrative behind her beloved public persona, the Emmys, and the Oscars than her followers ever knew. Sally Field spent decades protecting the public's perception of her while concealing the darker aspects of her life story. She kept her personal struggles on set, and struggles in the shadow of powerful men in Hollywood hidden from the public eye until her brutally honest memoir, In Pieces, was published in 2018. This is not, however, a discussion of the performers that Sally Field despised. It is serious gossip. We are not only compiling a list of names from a registry. Rather, we are delving into a meticulously crafted story in order to comprehend the challenging and occasionally detrimental connections that molded her. Maybe hate is oversimplified. Instead, what we see is a range of experiences, beginning with professional friction and progressing to on-set tension, to a love that was so poisonous that it almost ruined her. Power dynamics, the stifling clutches of misogyny in Hollywood, and Field's personal battle to discover her voice and establish her own space are all themes that run across these relationships. The real price of her accomplishment and survival can be understood by looking at these 6 key figures. The protagonist learns to persevere through adversity rather than giving up when faced with adversity. Among these relationships, the one with the guy who was once the world's largest movie star was the most formative and disastrous. Burt Reynolds is the name that will always be associated with Sally Fields, for better or worse. We'll never know. At first glance, they exemplified the epitome of a perfect 1970s and 1980s pair. He was the charismatic, mustachioed, wisecracking entertainment industry tycoon. With her recent Emmy for the TV movie Sybil, she had demonstrated her serious dramatic talents, and she was just your average great girl next door actress. From what I've heard, their connection was electric and immediate when they met in 1977 on set of Smokey and the Bandit. As their love for one another grew, so did the world's adoration for them. They worked together on 4 films: Hooper, Smokey and the Bandit Hound, The End, and Smokey and the Bandit. Their on-screen chemistry appeared to mirror their real-life romance. They enjoyed a 5-year reign as movie stars, but a different scenario was playing out in their shared houses, away from the prying eyes of the press. Their connection takes up a substantial and tragic amount of space in Field's memoir, In Pieces. Hate is not a word she uses. Far more complex and sinister than that are the emotions she reveals. She describes a strong affection in her writing. However, an obsession with dominance, possessiveness, and an oppressive feeling of ownership permeated the love. Field paints a picture of Reynolds as a man who, despite his tough front, is profoundly insecure. A desire to exert control over her emerged from this uneasiness. He would be critical of her weight, her professional decisions, and her overall look. Reynolds wasn't entirely supportive when she received an Oscar nomination for Norma Ray, a role she had battled for with all her might. Field describes how he acted like he was pouting, nearly bitter about all the focus on her for an unrelated endeavor. Even though the film was being celebrated at the Cannes Film Festival, he was not interested in going with her. In spite of winning the greatest accolade in her field on Oscar night in 1980, she recalls the event with mixed emotions, including the stress of trying to keep Burt from losing his composure. She claimed that he was unhappy about her achievement. She achieved success on her own, which was unacceptable in his world. He had envisioned her as an extension of himself. His devotion required her to keep her head down, even though she describes him as her first major complicated love. He represented several other domineering male personalities in her life, such as her stepfather, stuntman Jock Mahoney. Having a need to please and perform in order to be loved by Reynolds shaped Field's youth. Unfortunately, she had relapsed into her destructive habits. Desperate for his acceptance, she says she shrank herself to fit the little space he gave her, becoming like a well-trained puppy. Her loved ones and her circle of friends were also under her control. She was cornered by him. She remembers how he treated her friends with disdain and how he made it hard for her to have friends outside of her little circle. He dictated the conditions of their union. She goes on to say that his paranoia and unstable moods were brought on by his extensive prescription drug use. She had to walk carefully, trying to avoid his emotional pitfalls at all times. Feuds confessedly loved him sincerely, which is the tragic part of their story. She perceived in him a frailty and pain that the outside world failed to notice. The author describes herself as somewhat hooked, while caring for a man who was, in some strange way, profoundly hurt. My stepfather's past acting. It was the archetypal trauma link. As she devoted herself to helping him, she began to feel like she was losing her own identity. Their romance came to an agonizing and drawn-out close. In doing so, I ensured my own survival. In order to forge her own path as an artist and a person, she had to flee. Reynolds would publicly acknowledge Feuds as his lifelong sweetheart and the one who slipped away for many years following their split. His narration skillfully evoked a sense of romance and nostalgia as it depicted their time together. Feuds didn't say much. She regained control of the storyline with the publication of her memoir, which came out soon after Reynolds passed away in 2018. She was heartbroken that he would never get her meaning or see their shared past through her eyes. Her goal was not vengeance. Her goal was to be forthright about what had happened to her. "I hate him" wasn't what she was implying. What she meant was that she had to escape the confines of their love in its current form. What remained for her was not hatred, but rather a complicated blend of love, sympathy, and an enduring melancholy for the woman she had been while he was in her life, and for the man he would never give himself permission to be. It was the relationship that defined her and caused the most harm to her. A less complicated, less emotionally charged, but nonetheless exceedingly terrible onset experience is represented by the second person on our list. This feud was a concentrated dose of professional anger, not a love control saga that lasted years. Tommy Lee Jones, better known by his stage name Backroads, is the actor in issue. For Feuds, this initiative arrived at a critical juncture. In the midst of her turbulent relationship with Burt Reynolds, she was attempting to manage her newfound stature as a serious dramatic actor, having just won an Oscar for Norma Rae. She co-starred with Tommy Lee Jones, an actor famous for his intensity, brilliance, and a rough, challenging persona in the picture. Production details from Backroads remained mostly a matter of industry lore for many years. However, Feuds was asked to choose the actor whose on-screen kiss she disliked most in 2016 during an appearance on Andy Cohen's late-night show Watch What Happens Live. Tommy Lee Jones was the one she chose without much thought. She elaborated on a lot more than just a nasty kiss. Throughout the play, she spoke frankly about his treatment of her. She informed Cohen, "He was not a pleasant man to me." She went on to explain that he was a major annoyance. The audience chuckled, but they understood. Jones was visibly nasty and uncaring toward her during her beginning experience, she said. She gave a vivid description of an incident that exemplified the dynamic. She recalled an incident where he entered the makeup trailer and made a remark to the artist, claiming, "Don't you think she has a face like a basset hound?" There was no creative conflict or method clash at work here. She said this out of pure malice. It lacked professionalism and kindness. Such a remark from Burt Reynolds would have been especially hurtful for an actress whose then-partner deliberately contributed to her crippling self-esteem issues and body image problems. She had just won an Oscar for her performance, and her co-star had supposedly insulted her looks in front of the crew. Take into account the setting. Cantankerousness is a well-known trait of Tommy Lee Jones. He has a reputation for being quite harsh and impatient with journalists. While several of his co-stars and directors have praised his creativity, few have said he's kind and welcoming. The public image that Jones would develop over the following decades was consistent with what Feuds described. There was no romantic element to this relationship that would have complicated her feelings, unlike her one with Reynolds. The encounter had its origins in business, but quickly took a negative turn. No in-depth psychiatric examination of Jones's motivations for this behavior was provided by Feuds. She just recounted her experience as it actually happened. He was rude and insulting to her, making her employment with him a nightmare. If there is hatred here, it is the kind that arises from contempt. It's the daily grind of pretending to be someone else while someone else is really ruining your life in the real world, all because you have to go to work. Due to its lackluster reception, Backroads is now almost forgotten. On the other hand, Sally Field's performance made Aspera vividly remember a co-star who, for some reason, chose to play the adversary. It was a sobering reminder that no one is safe from the casual brutality that can occur on a Hollywood set, regardless of how many Oscars they have. Following this individual is an atmosphere, not a person, that has become legendary in Hollywood thanks to its crucible of tremendous talent and extreme pressure. Furthermore, the dispute was not a straightforward rivalry between individuals, but rather a tangled web of personalities colliding under the direction of an infamously demanding director. The truth is significantly more complex and suggests an alternative origin of hatred between Sally Field and her youthful co-star Julia Roberts, although rumors regarding a purported quarrel have circulated for years. In its day, Steel Magnolias was unmatched. Dolly Parton, Sally Field, Olympia Dukakis, Shirley MacLaine, and Daryl Hannah were an impressive lineup of female actors in this production based on a play by Robert Harling. As Shelby, Field's diabetic daughter, the breakout performance came from the then-unknown Julia Roberts. Each member of the cast had to let their guard down tremendously for this moving tribute to female friendship in a tiny southern town. There appears to be some animosity between Field and Roberts due to the inherent power dynamic between a two-time Oscar winner and a newcomer. Films featuring preponderantly female casts have long been hampered by the story of catty onset, which the tabloids were quick to portray throughout that era. Their reasoning was that either Roberts was a diva who didn't value her elders' opinions, or Field was envious of all the attention Roberts was getting. But according to every reliable source, including the actors themselves, this story is mostly untrue. Field has been very vocal about Roberts' extraordinary skill. The natural talent, charisma, and star power were all visible to her. The emotional center of the picture revolved around their on-screen relationship, which depicts a mother who can be overprotective and stifles her daughter's fierce independence. The passion and intensity in their scenes together is palpable. What onlookers might have seen for genuine hostility was really just the ferocity of two talented actors stepping into their demanding parts. Then why was there tension on site if Field didn't despise Julia Roberts? Field, Parton, and MacLaine are among those who have speculated that the film's director, Herbert Ross, is the one responsible. Finally, we have director Herbert Ross, the third character who made life tough for Field. He had a long and successful career as a director, with films such as Footloose and The Goodbye Girl. A perfectionist and notoriously tough taskmaster, he was known to impose his will on his actors. A tangible feeling of anxiety was generated on the set of Steel Magnolias by his actions. In her memoir, Shirley MacLaine went into detail about Ross, calling him a bastard and a difficult guy. Reportedly, he was especially hard on Dolly Parton, who was less experienced in dramatic acting. Parton has recounted how Ross would constantly remind her that she was an actress and that she should enroll in acting classes. How degrading and heartless. Field, MacLaine, and Dukakis, among the other women, came together to support her and defend her to the director, according to her recollection. Being the long-running linchpin of the ensemble, Field was forced to play the role of both entertainer and mediator. In addition to keeping her own performance under control, she had to deal with the director's volatile nature and stand by her less experienced co-stars while they were verbally attacked by him. As she and her fellow actresses have put it, it was like being in the trenches. The intense commitment and protective love we witness on screen was born out of a shared hardship. There was no fighting going on between them. Together, they were able to outlast their director. It wasn't just Dolly Parton that Herbert Ross had in mind. Rumor has it that he was also quite critical of Julia Roberts. It was extremely demanding for Roberts to portray Shelby during her iconic diabetic seizure scene. Her co-star said that Ross was cruel since he forced her to do take after take while constantly criticizing and demanding more from her. She was shielded from his rants by their intervention. Consequently, the animosity on Steel Magnolias was not directed towards the Magnolias themselves. It was aimed squarely at the head of the department, who mostly motivated his staff through threats and verbal abuse. The combination of Sally Field's recent exit from a controlling and critical relationship and her career-long struggle for respect would have made working with Ross an arduous task. Once again, a prominent male was telling accomplished women that they weren't cut out for the big time. On set, she played the part of a protector and an expert, not an antagonist. In addition to doing an excellent job of her role, she protected her co-stars from the worst of the director's antics. No animosity toward Julia Roberts was sparked by the incident. It brought the women who survived the fires to her and strengthened their bonds with them forever. Despite the challenges, the film's central message, that women find strength in one another, remains unchanged, particularly when confronted with the challenges imposed upon them by the outside world, or in this instance, by an autocratic director. Herbert Ross may have gotten the result he desired, but he sacrificed a lot of lives in the process. the cast had to pull together to overcome the tension and hostility he fostered. Sally Field experienced a particular character in her career, a masculine authority figure who casually uses his power with cruelty, and Herbert Ross exemplifies this. He becomes our fourth major character in this story. His actions were commonplace on the set of Steel Magnolias. He was well known even before he was born. The Turning Point, a 1977 ballet drama starring Shirley MacLaine and in Bancroft, was directed by Field. There were rumors of squabbles between the two iconic starring women in that film as well, which Ross allegedly exacerbated by creating an extremely high-pressure setting. Ross has extensive experience in the highly controlled and precise field of choreography. His film directorial style was characterized by the same autocratic approach. Actors, in his view, were more frequently treated as objects to be manipulated than as partners in creative endeavors. A performer of Sally Field's caliber would inevitably find this style to be incompatible. She had grown up since her days at the Flying Nun and was no longer the submissive child when she recorded Steel Magnolias. She had fought for creative control over her own career, won 2 Oscars, and was a producer. No one was going to treat her like a pawn since she had worked for her seat at the table. Thus, her feud with Ross was based on more than simply his insensitivity toward others. It was a battle of core beliefs about their respective professions. Field's acting approach necessitated a level of trust and flexibility because it was based on discovering the emotional truth of a character. This was in stark contrast to Ross's approach, which advocated authoritarian teaching methods. In order to collaborate with him, she had to mentally separate herself from the mayhem he was causing so that she could get her work done. Fields has dealt with masculine ego and power issues throughout his career, and this incident exemplifies that theme. Field had to continuously find ways to work in situations that were frequently antagonistic to her, as a woman and an artist, from Burt Reynolds' domineering love to Tommy Lee Jones' disparaging remarks and Herbert Ross's despotic direction. If she had any animosity toward Ross at all, it would have been the intense annoyance of a successful professional dealing with dishonest treatment. That feeling of helplessness that comes from witnessing your co-workers belittled and from having to divert your attention away from creating art and toward coping with a poisonous work environment. A fantastic microcosm of the difficulties women had in that age of Hollywood is the dynamic on the set of Steel Magnolias. The film industry was eager to cash in on a story about women standing together, but it put an aggressive man with a history of bullying actors in charge of directing the project. What a powerful irony. The poise and resiliency that Field and her co-stars exhibited were not merely acting skills. They were essential to the success of the show. Field's remarkable resilience was on full display as she not only survived, but flourished in that hostile setting, delivering a performance that would go down in history as one of her most memorable. She kept her work and relationships with her co-stars intact despite Ross's destructive personality. One of the strongest reactions to such treatment is silence, but she rose above it in a subtle act of rebellion. Sally Field has never met someone as academically and artistically frightening as our fifth figure. We didn't meet on set to form this bond. Within the confines of a revered, yet terrifyingly little classroom, Lee Strasberg, the most prominent American advocate of the method, was the man. He was also the renowned artistic director of the Actors Studio. This kind of hatred is more nuanced and unique. Some people may feel this way toward a mentor who brings out the worst in them, so they can bring out the best in their mentee. A person whose affirmation you seek so intensely that any criticism they may offer feels like a punch in the gut. To grasp Field's connection with Strasberg, one must grasp her professional standing in the mid-1970s. Even when she got over her Gidget and Flying Nun personas, the Hollywood elite still didn't take her seriously as an actor. She was admired for her dedication to her job, but she wasn't considered an artist on par with actors like Faye Dunaway, Ellen Burstyn, or Jane Fonda. For that esteem, Field yearned relentlessly. She felt an overwhelming need to demonstrate the dramatic depth she knew she possessed. For her, and many others, the Actors Studio was the doorway to that type of credibility. Renowned acting school, the Actors Studio has been around for a long time. Actors like James Dean, Marlon Brando, Paul Newman, and Al Pacino all got their starts there. Lee Strasberg, a guru-like figure who taught a variant of method acting that emphasized players drawing on their own emotional memories to drive their performances, was at the helm of this movement. He was known for his psychologically taxing and frequently violent method. Getting into the studio was a fight for Field. Upon doing so, she discovered an atmosphere that was thrilling yet horrifying. Not only would her classmates see her perform scenes, but Strasberg himself would sit in judgment. The candor and psychological insight of his criticisms made him famous. With only a few understated remarks, he might ruin an entire performance. That was a really precarious situation for a young actress like Field, who had inherited a lot of fears from her stepfather and mother. In her story, she describes how terrified she was to perform for him. For weeks at a time, she would dedicate herself fully to a scene, only to have Strasberg either ignore it or, far worse, analyze it in a manner that revealed her innermost vulnerabilities and worries. It pretended to be an acting lesson, but was actually a kind of psychological warfare. She persisted, though. Why? Reason being, she thought it was essential. She felt this was a necessary evil if she ever wanted to make it as an actress. She had to prove herself worthy of this distant, unforgiving father figure's approbation. The student's wrath against the impossible-to-please master likely manifested into a hatred for Strasberg. Feeling like her efforts will always fall short was the root of her frustration. What I experienced was the sensation of being completely exposed, of having your deepest, darkest feelings and memories manipulated for the purpose of a scene. Strasberg's technique suggested that performers draw on their personal experiences of trauma. This was an extremely risky and agonizing procedure for Field, whose life had previously seen considerable hardship. He is still credited by her, realizes he was the one who forced her to do things she never would have done alone. Through his influence, she was compelled to face and express her most vulnerable, complex, and unfiltered aspects through her art. She portrayed a woman with multiple personality disorder in her breakthrough dramatic performance in Sybil, which came after her stint at the Actors Studio. It's not a coincidence. She had to draw on a wide spectrum of complicated feelings to portray that role, something for which she had been trained by Strasberg. Shortly later, for Norma Ray, she won her first Academy Award. A crucible was her friendship with Strasberg. She probably hated the control he had over her because it was so terrible and hard. Conversely, though, it was a game changer. He legitimized her like no one else had before, and he also offered her new tools and a vocabulary to express herself creatively. Generally speaking, she didn't despise the man. However, she probably despised the ordeal she had to go through to earn his regard. A difficult and troubled connection with a mentor who taught her the way to her own power by first showing her how helpless she was an unfortunate but essential part of her journey to greatness. The sixth and last actor on our list is now here. This one has been a constant struggle for Sally Field throughout her life. It is the most complicated and widespread of all. This enemy does not consist of just one individual. The Hollywood system and her own self-perceived insignificance come together to form this abstract force. The most formidable opponent Sally Field faced was, paradoxically, herself and the industry's mirror image of her. As soon as her career began, Sally Field was labeled. It was adorable. Perky she was. As Gidget and later as Sister Betrayal in The Flying Nun, she exuded an air of non-threateningness. To put it simply, she personified pure, risk-free entertainment. Although the system adored her for it, it also ensnared her. In her attempts to break out and play more substantial roles, doors were slammed shut. The flying habit was too much for the casting directors, producers, and directors to overlook. They weren't seeing a dramatic actress. They were seeing a TV comedian. Defeating typecasting was a frontal assault on the Hollywood industry as a whole. It is a system that takes great pleasure in classifying, naming, and limiting its female stars in particular. They had constructed a cozy little world for Fields, but her desire to portray strong, imperfect women was a direct threat to that. She famously fought for the role of Sybil. Nobody wanted her on the network. The producers had their doubts. To demonstrate her range, she had to struggle and claw. It was her first big win against the system when she won the part and the Emmy for it. However, the system wasn't limited to the outside. Its principles had crept into her own mind. The core of her revelations in Pieces revolve around this. From the time she was a little girl, her entire existence was a stage. Margaret Field was an emotionally aloof and critical mother who was also a working actress. She liked her charismatic stuntman stepfather Jock Mahoney, but he abused her. She concealed this truth for many years. She learned from her upbringing that love was fickle, that she was only valuable if she could win over other people, especially strong men, and that she should keep her authentic identity a secret. The internal enemy was this firmly held belief that one is inadequate. The internal monologue corroborated the casting director's assessments that she lacked the necessary dramatic chops. It was the side of her that felt attracted to Burt Reynolds, a domineering man, for the simple reason that she recognized the pattern of his power from her own history, a twisted love. That was the side of her that wanted to win over a controlling boss like Lee Strasberg. Because she lacked a solid foundation of self-worth, she was always seeking approval from others. Her now iconic phrase, "You like me, right now? You like me?" was cruelly misquoted and made fun of when she accepted her second Academy Award for Places in the Heart. At the height of my vulnerability, but when seen through the lens of her life narrative, its significance changes and becomes more profound. A lady who had spent her whole life attempting to gain acceptance from those who mattered most to her, her parents, her partners, her mentors, and an industry that had perpetually disregarded her, let out a scream. She felt it for the first time at that very second. Due to the extreme importance of the matter, the level of approval was phenomenal. Thus, Sally Field's internalized hatred is the story's final antagonist. Her autobiographical journey is not about making amends with people she has wronged in the past. This is the tale of a lady who, according to her own words, comes to finally own her art. The story revolves around her journey of self-discovery, where she overcomes her inner critic, defies industry limitations, and ultimately stands strong, not as a tool for a man or a system, but as an individual. The foils were the challenging guys she encountered on her journey, the villains who made her become stronger. She learned to be self-reliant as a result of Burt Reynolds' control. She had to defend her professional honor after Tommy Lee Jones insulted her. Because of Herbert Ross's despotism, she had no choice but to take charge and defend her people. She turned her personal suffering into art as a weapon due to Lee Strasberg's psychological warfare. There was a lesson in every debate. She learned to accept herself more fully with each challenging relationship. As a result, the misleading title of 6 actors Sally Field hated most is a clickbait piece. Instead of a story about hatred, it's about conflict. She struggled against the system's attempts to categorize her, men's attempts to exert control over her, and her own demons' messages that she was worthless. What really matters is not her hatred of them, but rather her triumph over them. And for that, more dramatic and inspiring than any role Sally Field has ever performed is her life. This is the account of a strong-willed lady who took a script that portrayed her as a helpless victim and rewrote it from the ground up with guts, skill, and determination. The Confessions of Sally Field reveal the hidden workings of Hollywood. Her forthrightness demonstrates that not all relationships between co-stars are amicable, and that even the most lauded performers encounter difficulties in the making of their films. Finally, her anecdotes serve as a reminder that behind-the-scenes conflict is all too common in the entertainment industry.